Hey everybody, today we're going to take a look at another political shift, and this is going to be the big one. It's going to be for president between 2020 and 2024. So we're going to have the spreadsheet, we're going to have the full map at the end, but just real quick, this is the final presidential map on New York Times for 2024. And by now, we're all familiar with Trump getting 312 electoral votes to 226 for Kamala Harris. Trump even has the popular vote, but at this point, it looks like it has dipped very slightly below 50%. Now, even though this is 3 to 4 weeks after Election Day, a few ballots still might be trickling in, if you can believe it, and these are not the actual final certified totals. But as everybody knows, Trump swept all 7 battleground states, and he had 6 flips from 2020, including Nevada, which he did not win in 2016. And you could just say Trump won, he did better than 2020, who cares where the shifts are? But if you're into political data, of course you want to know exactly where those shifts were and by how much. Now there's going to be a ton of maps out there with different data, but on New York Times, you can actually just click right here and see the shifts from 2020. And this will give you a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be seeing. It's pretty much a sea of red out there from coast to coast. This looks very similar to the shifts we saw between 2012 and 2016, and it's almost the opposite of the shifts between 16 and 20. There's always going to be some exceptions like in South Texas and Florida, but there are very few blue arrows on here, and the ones that there are not really all that significant. So with that out of the way, I know everybody's waiting to see the spreadsheet, and it's not the sexiest way to present the data, but it's what we've got. So the first column is obviously the states. The second column is the percentage of the Democrat in 2020, that's Joe Biden. Next to that, we've got the percentage of the Republican in 2020, that's Donald Trump. Then we've got the recent data here. It's the 2024 data for the Democrat, Kamala Harris. Then the 2024 data for Donald Trump. Then we've got the Democratic shifts between 2020 and 2024, followed by the Republican shifts. And the last column are the net shifts between the two parties between the two elections. And this column also has shading. The very darkest colors are going to be 10 or more point shifts. The medium colors are going to be 5 to 9.9, and the lightest colors are going to be under 5-point shifts. And again, the last caveat I'll say here is I tried to go through all the data. I tried to use New York Times, AP, Dave Leap's U.S. Atlas of Presidential Elections, and Wikipedia. But unfortunately, there are occasional small discrepancies between the different sources. There's not a lot I can do about that, but usually those are going to be pretty small. So hopefully there's no mistakes, but either way, this should be at least close to highly accurate. So let's start here in Alabama. In 2020, Joe Biden got 36.6. Donald Trump got an even 62. Then less than a month ago, Kamala Harris ticked down to 34.2, while Trump ticked up to 64.8. That's a reduction of 2.4 for Harris and an increase of 2.8 for Trump. That's a swing and a total net shift of 5.2 toward Donald Trump. So that's how this works. Now we can quickly go through the rest of these states. And the spoiler was there's going to be a lot of red on here. So next, Alaska, that's take out redder by 3.1. Arizona had a decent shift toward the right of 5.8. Arkansas, a smaller shift of 3%. California had a decent lurch toward Trump of 8.8. Colorado went toward him by 2.5, and Connecticut by 5.5. Delaware a bit smaller by 4.2. Florida just under 10 points, 9.8 toward Trump. Georgia swung 2.5 toward Trump. Hawaii 6.3. Idaho 5.7. Illinois very similar at 5.9. Indiana already a red state, but it got 2.9% redder. Iowa same story, but it got even redder by 5.1. In the sunflower state, Kansas had a small red shift of 1.6. Kentucky went toward the right by 4.8. Louisiana 3.4. Maine at 2.4. Maryland even redder by 5.1, and Massachusetts redder still by a healthy 8.7. The key Rust Belt state of Michigan got redder by 4.2. Minnesota swung toward Trump by 2.9. In Mississippi, I overlooked how big of a red shift that was, but it was actually at 7.8. Missouri a little redder by an even 3. Montana 3.6. Nebraska just 1.5. In Nevada, the state that Trump won for the first time, by 5.5. New Hampshire 1 point less than that at 4.5. In the Garden State, New Jersey, that had a surprise big lurch toward Trump at an even 10.0. New Mexico about half that at 4.7. In the Empire State, New York, that had the biggest shift out of all the states, even more than New Jersey. That went a stunning 11.4 away from Kamala Harris and toward Donald Trump. In North Carolina, that shifted 1.9 toward Trump. Then in North Dakota, that went in his direction by 3.4. Ohio by 3.2. Oklahoma just 1.2 in the Sooner State. Oregon, not a lot here either, 1.8. The Keystone State, PA, went 2.9 toward Trump. Rhode Island had a bigger shift in his direction by 7. South Carolina, a little less red by 6.1. South Dakota, an even 3. Tennessee jumped toward Trump by 6.5. Texas had an even bigger jump by 8.3. Utah, only a small shift there by 1.2. Vermont, it's a blue state, but it went 3.6 toward Trump. Virginia, just under 5, 4.9 toward Trump. Washington had a small shift out of all the states. Trump doing better there by just 0.9 9.9 compared to 2020. In West Virginia, that state managed to squeeze another 3% out in Trump's direction. Wisconsin, not a lot there, 1.5 toward Trump, but that was enough to flip the state. And finally, in Wyoming, that state got a little bit redder by 2.9. And then we've got Washington, D.C. here. For this, some of the data I found was inconsistent, but I've got it at 0.9 toward Trump. And the national popular vote shift was 6.1 toward Trump. That's a pretty big shift. So those are all the states, and those are all the shifts. But if you want to help visualize all these shifts, we can take all of this data and apply it to a map. If we do that, this is what it looks like. And we've got similar shading. The darkest colors, New Jersey and New York, those are going to be 10 or more point shifts. 5 to 9.9% shifts are going to be those middle colors. The lighter colors are going to be 1 to 4.9% shifts. And finally, under 1 point shifts are going to be the very lightest colors. Those are going to be the tilt margins. And those are going to be Washington and Washington, D.C. So what are some of the takeaways from these shifts? Well, with all the hype leading up to the 2024 election, we finally got the answers. Turns out Trump did a lot of damage pretty much across the board. He even managed to pull off the popular vote win, which a lot of people might have thought was improbable. But all the crazy theories out there about the polling and about the demographics and about the states and counties, some of them thought it was going to lead to Harris having a massive landslide, and some of them also thought Trump was going to have an even bigger landslide than this. A lot of people were proven wrong, and the biggest shocks on here are probably going to be states close to the Northeast. It's going to be New York, New Jersey, even Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Maryland. Those are some blue states, and they're still pretty blue outside of New Jersey, but some of those are a much lighter shade of blue at this point. You could say the same about Illinois and California as well. Texas and Florida were already red, but they got a lot redder than most people expected. And there were a few states like Kansas, Utah, and Washington. They went toward Trump, but they were by a much smaller margin. Is it significant? I would say not really, but some of those could be places to take a look at in the future to see what those trends are. Now, I also do have the shifts on here for the individual congressional districts in Nebraska and Maine. And if you're a Kamala Harris fan, this map might not be for you, except for one place. That's going to be Nebraska's first congressional district, not the second. The second one was won by Harris, but that actually shifted slightly toward Trump by just over 1 point. It's the first district that actually moved toward Harris also by just over 1 point. The third went toward Trump, but that was by less than 1 point. In Maine, both those districts just a little bit toward Trump by over 1 point. I tried to double check things to make sure I've got it right, but Nebraska's first. Harris can at least hang her head on that. Maybe it keeps going toward the left in the future, but if so, I would think the second district would have also moved in that direction, which it did not. Anyway, some of the shading on these margins is very borderline, like Virginia going 4.9 or Florida going 9.8. Now, there's going to be some different reasons for the specific shifts in some of these states, even the specific counties. The biggest one that comes to mind is Trump making big gains with Hispanic voters. That's going to translate more into some of these border states, especially in Texas and South Texas. But if you've looked at some of the exit polls and seen some of the other shifts with different demographics, it was gains for Trump in almost every single one of them. The Dems do continue to seem to do better with college-educated voters, while the GOP does better with working-class voters. And I know the Republicans are looking at these shifts right now and they're celebrating, as they should. But sooner or later, Dems are going to come back and put up some wins. And there's no way you could expect these types of shifts to continue. But when you've got it, you've got to ride it as long as you can. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? This is just a snapshot in time. It could stay the same for a little while longer, or everything could be different on the next election. So I'm going to leave it there for now, but these are the shifts for president between 2020 and 2024. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about any of the shifts in any of these states? Which ones are you surprised moved as much as they did, and which ones are you surprised moved as little as they did? What are some of the reasons behind these shifts, and what are you taking a look at that might be under the surface? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.